What if I told you, if you have a rigid political belief, whether it's firmly Marxist or firmly free market, the neuroscience of today has declared that your brain is broken. In a recent book published by Dr. Leor Zmigrod of Cambridge University, which she herself has described as both fascinating and disturbing, she cites studies in which participants were given small tasks that eventually required adapting to their surroundings by freeing up thought to accomplish the matter at hand. The task required out-of-the-box thinking, being more creative. Take, for example, an art teacher gives you 3 minutes to build a paper house with 9 sheets of A4 paper. The group struggles. Each participant is separated, so as to not cheat off one another. Suddenly, one by one, those all around you start ringing a bell, denoting that their task has been completed. You sweat, panic, nowhere near complete, but only seconds yet to go. You emerge disappointed, sweaty, and enraged as you see the final result of your peers. The winners used just one single sheet to make a tiny paper house. Of course, you think. Why didn't I think of that? Zmigrod's neuromapping of those who fail to adapt readily in tasks such as these found that these same people have biological cues in their brains that seemingly denote more rigid thought structures. What's fascinating is these same peoples were found to be ideologically rigid when it came to political views. Those who have strong views in the conservative way of thought were found to have enlarged amygdalas, the seat of fear in the brain, responsible for more negative emotions like disgust and threat. Those with extreme liberal ideologies have smaller amygdalas, but retain the same rigidity of thought. The results infer that liberal extremists aren't basing their beliefs in fear as much as conservatives, but are no less rigid in their thought structures. Those who could complete the task readily by using out-of-the-box lines of thought also have biological markers. Their neural mapping denoted genetic markers with heightened amounts of dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, which is associated with higher learning levels. Dopamine regulates mood, is responsible for learning, your sleep, your attention and reward system, all of which is disrupted by the phone in your hand. That's a topic for another day. You may have heard of what's often called the lizard brain within our neural landscape. This is the part of the brain responsible for more primitive behaviors and survival prompting. Neurally speaking, this region is made up of the brainstem and the basal ganglia, which sounds very appetizing. Within the basal ganglia, you find the striatum. This part of the brain is responsible for motor control, decision-making, emotion, habit formation, and the reward system, but it is based within the confines of the more primitive region of the brain, and as such, comes from a more lizard-like conception of our surroundings. What's most fascinating about the study is how rigid ideological types, whether they be left-leaning or right, both have higher levels of dopamine in this region of the brain within their striatum, while ideologically flexible people had less dopamine nested here, and much more in their prefrontal cortex, responsible for higher levels of learning. Regarding this, Zmigrod says genetics can affect how rigidly they process the world, which is fascinating and disturbing. Indeed it is. She goes on to say we are predetermined to lean towards certain ideologies, due in no small part by our genetic makeup, as well as being conditioned by our surroundings from a young age to adhere to certain ideological frameworks, such as the family we were brought up in, the things we watch on television, our friends, what they believe in. So those ideological identities we cling to, like Marxism or conservatism, in reality are as less a choice as whether or not you like the taste of cilantro or coriander, depending on which side of the pond you fall on. What's interesting is Zmigrod found that times of prolonged stress can increase this rigidity within your neural makeup. There's another study which seems to support this too. In The Smell of Disgust, olfactory cues increase political conservatism. People were exposed to a foul-smelling spray, purportedly which mimicked sustained flatulence before they were provided with a political survey. Those who experienced a foul smell, aka had their sense of disgust triggered, gave higher levels of conservative responses in the survey, as opposed to those in the control group not exposed to the foul odor, who gave less conservative views. What this shows us is how regions of our brain can be activated, which then affect our outlook of the world in a given moment. What Zmigrod's study shows us is that these outlooks can be rigid by both our initial biological makeup, as well as our genetic makeup from birth, as well as the social framework we grow up in. Those who have less rigidity in their views were able to excel better in complex tasks and retain better learning ability. What this shows us is that the great philosopher of ancient Greece, Socrates, was onto something when, having been called the wisest of all Athenians, went about Greece trying desperately to find someone wiser than himself to prove the oracle of Delphi wrong. Finally, having found every one of them to be so rigid in their views, he realized, I know nothing except the fact that I know nothing. But, as I alone can recognize this means I alone am free enough to think clearly. Food for thought. To fix our brains, then, all we must do is follow Socrates' example, admit to not having all the answers, and be very wary of those who purport to.